Fatal Attraction is considered by many to be one of the most famous thrillers of the 1980s, and quite possibly one of the best in general. And there is no denying that it is indeed iconic, with Glenn Close's legendary maniac performance as Alex Forrester still scaring many a man out of an affair even decades later. But it might surprise some people to learn that Fatal Attraction was not the first movie to depict an affair gone bad that leads to a woman stalking and terrorizing a man. It may have been a trendsetter as far as that goes, yes, but it wasn't actually the first to do it. In fact, there's one movie that Fatal Attraction obviously took so much inspiration from that some have even actually called it a semi-remake of the earlier movie. And the movie in question would be the 1971 Clint Eastwood movie Play Misty for Me in his directorial debut. And there will be spoilers for both movies ahead, so in case you haven't seen either of them yet but would like to, you probably shouldn't proceed with this video. This is the only spoiler warning I'll be giving out. Okay, so just to clear up one thing immediately, Fatal Attraction is not an actual remake of Play Misty for Me, as the two movies have way too many differences between them for it to ever be considered that. It's more that Play Misty for Me was evidently a huge inspiration in the writing of Fatal Attraction. Because again, at its core, both movies are about men having a one-night stand with a woman who quickly grows obsessive and starts stalking them, eventually becoming homicidal once the man rejects them outright. But again, how these two concepts are presented is completely different from each other. Because, as is rather well known, Michael Douglas's character is a married man who has a one-night stand with Alex Forrester, who claims to be pregnant afterwards and grows increasingly psychotic in her attempts to have him for herself, forcing him to flee as much as possible and eventually come clean about the whole thing. In Play Misty for Me, however, the setup is totally different. In that movie, Clint Eastwood plays a single DJ for a radio station who comes across a fan of his that calls in every night asking him to play the song Misty for her, and after a one-night stand finds himself starting to be smothered by her as she attempts to integrate herself into his life. And then things only get worse when he starts to reconnect with an old flame of his that he's genuinely in love with, which is really what starts to push his obsessive fan off the deep end. Now, Play Misty for Me is most certainly not the greatest thriller ever made, and in particular suffers from pretty slow pacing in a few places, which is something I'll definitely give Fatal Attraction credit for. It knew how to move at a thriller's pace. But if you thought Clint Eastwood could only play tough guys, then this movie would most definitely prove you wrong, as he plays a simple everyman who not only has his moments of emotional vulnerability, but is very convincingly able to play a stalker victim who ends up quite terrified and in fear of his life over a rather small woman. And all of this while also being behind the camera for the first time too. But that only helps serve to make it more terrifying, as Jessica Walters plays Evelyn so effectively that any normal person would be left terrified of her. I mean, Glenn Close might be the gold standard for roles like that, but Walters proves to be just as convincing as a dangerously unhinged woman determined to have her man. Though, granted, she doesn't exactly have a bunny boiler moment. But where Play Misty for me can be best compared to Fatal Attraction is in how it handles the more controversial aspects of the latter. Because ever since the movie came out, people have been debating over whether or not Dan should have been forgiven by his wife because of what he did. Because it isn't unreasonable to say that if he just hadn't had the affair in the first place, then none of it would have ever happened. But at the same time, some also argue that what he has to go through more than makes up for it. And some have even pointed out that Alex's behavior is also a bit unwarranted, as Dan made it crystal clear to her that they were just having a one-night stand and she acts like he was leading her on. Now, my point is, regardless of which camps you personally fall into regarding those aspects, Play Misty for me, by contrast, doesn't suffer from any of these problems. Because as I said before, in that movie, he's not only single, but explicitly stated to be on a break with his girlfriend when he meets up with Evelyn. And moreover, because he's a DJ for a radio station, it makes it all the more plausible that he might end up having to deal with a stalker or two. The difference is just that Evelyn is able to hide it at first. Because in actuality, in this movie, she's the one who lets him on, letting him believe that she's open to just having a one-night stand with him, and then from there starts becoming a bigger part, and problem, in his life. And unlike Dan in Fatal Attraction, who knows that he could suffer some major consequences if his affair is found out, Eastwood doesn't really have to face any of that and still doesn't want to involve his girlfriend in what's going on, both because he just doesn't want to make it her problem and because he's trying to convince her that he loves her. So naturally having to explain that a one-night stand of his had turned into an obsessive stalker could get a little awkward. To put it simply, the Clint Eastwood movie arguably does a slightly better job of making sure the sympathetic characters are sympathetic. I mean, sure, at the end of the day, Dan doesn't deserve everything he has to go through as a result of his affair with Alex, and the fact that she takes things as far as she does ensures that the audience is still going to feel bad for him. But because he's the one who chose to have the affair in the first place, it can make him come across as less sympathetic than the writers want him to. In Play Misty for me, though, Clint Eastwood is on a break with his girlfriend, just looking for a one-night stand, and is led to believe that's really all it would be. So as a result, everything that he has to deal with afterwards comes across as in no way deserved and firmly ensures that he will have the audience's sympathy, especially because he repeatedly holds back and doesn't take things as far as he could in dealing with her. Now listen, all of this isn't to say that Fatal Attraction isn't a good movie or anything like that. Because I'll be the first person to say it. It most definitely accomplishes everything it sets out to do and does make for a very intense and effective thriller. I'm more just trying to compare and contrast it with the movie that inspired it and looking at what each one may have done better than the other. But if nothing else, one thing that both of them nail is the ending. Now I know that the theatrical ending of Fatal Attraction happened because test audiences found Alex killing herself in an unsuccessful attempt to frame Dan as anticlimactic, but I honestly believe that going with an ending more similar to Play Misty for me was the right move. Because at that point, I could definitely buy Alex just losing her mind completely and wanting to kill Dan's wife regardless of what happened next. But either way, there's no denying that both of these instances are among the rare times where the audience actively wants to see the attractive woman die at the end. Because while they may have been pretty on the outside, they had long proved themselves to be anything but on the inside. And just for one final note, many psychologists have taken a great deal of interest in both these movies and have tried to figure out what exactly the two girls suffer from. Though they found diagnosing Evelyn from Play Misty for Me to be a much easier task, as she's said to fit the mold of borderline personality disorder almost to a T, while Alex Forrester has been noted to be a much harder case to diagnose, with some even believing she would have had to have suffered from some pretty bad abuse as a child for her to behave the way she does. But nevertheless, many psychologists have said that she could definitely exist in real life. In fact, the term bunny boiler has even been used to describe people with mental conditions similar to the ones that Alex shows in the movie, meaning that her portrayal might even predate the classifying of the mental disorders she probably suffers from. But in the end, the point is that while Fatal Attraction was a rather iconic movie when it first came out and has proven to stand the test of time, it owes a lot of its inspiration to a movie that most people aren't nearly as familiar with. In fact, as a result of the success and relevance of Fatal Attraction, it might even affect one's ability to watch Play Misty for Me and understand just why exactly it scared audiences in 1971 so much. Especially because, as I pointed out before, it definitely drags in a couple of places. But even if its legacy has been somewhat diminished by Fatal Attraction, I still believe most would concede that it is a good movie. Because at the end of the day, the movie had to have some merits to it, as the simple fact is that if there was no Play Misty for Me, then there would probably be no Fatal Attraction. Okay, that's everything I had to say. So now I'd like to hear from you guys. Are you surprised to hear about all of this? Or had you already heard of Play Misty for Me and knew it had been an inspiration for Fatal Attraction? Please feel free to let me know whatever you think in the comments below. And like always, it's okay if you don't agree with any opinions expressed here. You are free to think anything about this or any other subject that you want to. And thank you all for watching. It's very greatly appreciated. And I hope to see you all next time.